I was 71 years old when a single sentence shoved me out of my own life. Sleep on the floor until you learn to respect our privacy. The words arrived down a phone line like a slap. Crisp and deliberate, turning my living room into a punishment cell. I said only, understood. Not because I agreed, but because something inside me had finally snapped. As I dragged a thin mattress across the tile and listened to my knees crackle like old paper, I realized I had mistaken servitude for love and obedience for family. That night, I tucked myself in on the cold floor and felt the first tremor of freedom. By 5:00 a.m., my body ached, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been in 3 years. I folded the blanket, slid the mattress into the closet, and moved through the kitchen by muscle memory coffee grinding, eggs whisking, toast crisping, while the truth arranged itself in quiet, unflinching lines. I had emptied my master bedroom for my son, Michael, and his wife, Jessica, when they'd asked to stay temporarily. I had turned my tiny sewing room into a makeshift nest and told myself we were a family making sacrifices together. The months had calcified into years. Their savings plan had melted into a lifestyle, and my love had been recast as invisible labor that required no gratitude. When Michael shuffled in, hair uncombed, he ate without looking up, as if mothers sleeping on floors were ordinary. Jessica descended 20 minutes later, wrapped in a silk robe I had laundered, her nails glossy, her eyes on her phone. She announced that friends would visit for lunch and that I should make something special. My son nodded, automatic as a light switch. I answered, as I always had, softly, efficiently, a yes disguised as survival, even as a new voice, small but steady. Asked why a woman who'd been humiliated in her own house should cook to impress strangers. The house still smelled faintly of last night's pot roast and extinguished candles, my careful table setting untouched. A small funeral for hope. I seasoned a chicken with herbs from the garden and washed romaine until the water ran clear. Hearing, with painful clarity, the recording my neighbor Barbara had pressed into my hand the day before. Jessica's laugh had been bright as broken glass. She called me meddlesome. She said she would put me in my place. She was going to teach me who ran this house. I had listened in silence, the words slipping under my ribs. If I had not slept on the floor after that, perhaps I would have found a way to excuse it. But the floor is honest. It tells the truth about your standing in a home. At noon, 3 women swept in behind Jessica, trailed by perfume and expensive handbags. They did not see me so much as step around me. Compliments about the aroma floated toward Jessica, who accepted them with a practiced smile and a joke that I was useful, if a little too involved. Laughter sprinkled salt into the air. I served plates, refilled glasses, and smiled like a polite ghost. They asked when the couple would move into their own place, and Jessica sighed theatrically that comfort was hard to abandon. No rent, no groceries, no cleaning a 5-star hotel with room service. Heads tilted in admiration. Not toward me, the supposed concierge, but toward the woman who had ordered that concierge to sleep on tile. I retreated to the kitchen after setting out the cheesecake, the one I had chilled since dawn. From there, I heard the softer comments, the ones people make when they assume walls or age will muffle the sound. I was an old woman who didn't understand boundaries. I was sentimental. I was a burden. I ran hot water and watched it fog the window, then cleared a circle with my palm and stared at the small square of garden where my herbs grew obediently. It struck me that the basil and I had learned the same lesson: thrive where you're planted, even if someone else harvests the leaves. When the last plate was scraped clean, they vanished into my old bedroom without a thank you. leaving me to restore the house to its hotel sheen. At dusk, Jessica returned to the kitchen with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. She said she hoped I had gotten the message. Young couples needed space. The house should be spotless at all times. More friends would be coming by. I stirred soup and nodded once, the word understood slipping out again. Not as surrender, but as strategy. The floor had taught me that the next decision must be final. It arrived 3 weeks later, ordinary as toast. From the kitchen, I heard Jessica on the phone in the living room. Voice light, careless. Arranging a visit for her mother? No need for a hotel, she said. The mother-in-law can sleep on the couch for a few days. It won't kill her. Free domestic help shouldn't go to waste. My hands went still on the skillet, in the reflection on the oven door. I saw my own face lined. Yes, but steady, and realized that no one would hand me dignity. I would have to take it. I walked into the living room and stood still until she noticed me. She did not hang up. She wanted her mother to hear whatever performance came next. She asked what I needed. I said I needed her to pack. I said I wanted my son and his wife to leave. She blinked, shocked that a servant had found a voice. She called for Michael like a siren. He came clattering down the stairs, half-dressed, already forming a defense he didn't believe. I told him to ask his wife what she'd said about couches and old women. Jessica flushed, then deflected. Michael pleaded for reason, for context, for the soft rug of motherhood I'd always laid under his missteps. But the floor had burned that rug to ash. I opened the front door and let the evening air decide with me. This is my house, I said. Today, it also becomes my life again. Michael's face tightened with the same helpless look he wore as a boy when truth cornered him. He said I was exaggerating, that Jessica spoke without thinking, that we should all calm down and revisit this in a week. I told him there would be no week. I told him 3 years had been long enough, that a floor was not a misunderstanding, that laughter over my labor was not a cultural difference, and that opening my door did not mean I had forfeited the deed. He stared at the threshold I had just opened wide, as though the night itself might argue with me. When he asked where they would go, I said that adults with salaries and choices always find a couch, a friend, a motel. I had found a floor in my own home at 10:10 p.m. Surely they could find something soft elsewhere by 11:00 p.m. They packed in a loud silence that made the walls feel suddenly taller. Suitcases thumped. Drawers snapped. Jessica moved through the house like a storm looking for a window to break and finding none. At the doorway she paused, eyes rimmed red, and said, I would regret destroying a family. I told her the destruction began when she confused my generosity with her entitlement. Michael stood on the porch with the last bag and asked me, one more time. Not to do this. I said I already had. They backed down the walkway, and I watched their car turn the corner at 11:32 p.m. The quiet that followed was not peace, it was shock, and then relief moving into the same room. I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and counted my breaths until they slowed. Morning found me at 7:00 a.m., rinsing the cups they had left in the sink. The house had a different echo, as if every room had taken one large, unburdened inhale. My neighbor Barbara knocked at 7:30 a.m. with a paper bag of pastries and the steadying energy of someone who had already buried the opinions of the world. She looked at my face and guessed the rest. We carried fresh sheets upstairs to the bedroom that used to be mine and would be mine again. I opened the windows, and sunlight stepped into the room like a guest who had been waiting on the porch for years. We stripped the bed, gathered the loose objects they had left behind, and folded the past into a neat pile at the foot of the mattress. When I told Barbara, I did not feel guilty. She laughed softly and said, "Why on earth would you feel guilty for finally acting like the owner of your own name?" By 10:04 a.m., the phone began to ring. I let it buzz into silence twice. Then picked up at 10:12 a.m. out of old habit. Michael sounded exhausted and offended, as if outrage were proof of virtue. He said they had slept in a hotel and that Jessica had cried all night. He said we were a family and that families made space for imperfection. I said I agreed. Imperfection was why I had lasted 3 years, but that cruelty did not qualify as a quirk. He asked what I wanted from them. I said I wanted my life back. He hung up, then called again at 1:05 p.m., his voice lower, requesting a conversation in person, alone. I agreed, but set the rules like a lock, just you. I said, and come at 2:00 p.m. He arrived at 2:03 p.m., thinner than he had been a year ago, a little wilted at the edges, and sat on the couch like a man visiting a bank to make a confession with insufficient funds, before he could find a speech. I asked to see the proof. He blinked. "What proof?" he said, even though we both knew. "The pregnancy," I replied. "If Jessica is pregnant. Show me a test, a date, a doctor's message." He fumbled out his phone and produced a photo of a plastic stick with 2 pink lines and a timestamp he probably hoped I wouldn't read. The picture looked smoothed, as if a filter had tried to clean the truth from the pixels. I asked where they had bought it on a Sunday night after 9:00 p.m., when the nearby pharmacies close at 8:00 p.m. He said they had kept it on hand for months. I asked why, if they had been trying. Jessica's prescription for birth control had been refilled at 4:18 p.m. the previous Thursday, which I knew because I had been the one to pick it up. He stared at the carpet and the boy in him, the one who used to confess to broken vases, lifted his shoulders in a sigh. He admitted it at 2:27 p.m., the words dragging like a chain across the floor. "She is not pregnant," he said. We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do. I asked whose idea it had been. He said Jessica's, then quickly added that he had agreed. I told him desperation was not a moral disinfectant. He asked for 1 week, then 3 days, then a single night. I said no, not because I wanted him homeless, but because I wanted myself whole. I told him that, if I gave an inch, he and Jessica would build a runway and land a year on it. He asked what he was to me now, if not a son who could rely on his mother. I said he was still my son, but the version of him I could trust would have to be built, not inherited. He left at 3:05 p.m., door closing with a finality that did not crush me this time. I made tea at 3:20 p.m. and sat at the kitchen table, hands flat on the wood, listening to the ordinary tick of the wall clock as if it were a new language I had finally learned. The next 2 days rolled by in clean, deliberate motions. I woke at 6:30 a.m., watered the herbs at 7:15 a.m., read on the patio at 9:00 a.m., and let my phone live on silent. On the third morning, a police cruiser idled at the curb at 9:40 a.m., and 2 polite officers asked if I was Helen Miller. They said a report had been filed, alleging I was confused, unsafe, and possibly a danger to myself. The fury that rose in me was no longer hot. It was cool and precise, like a scalpel. I invited them in at 9:45 a.m., offered coffee, and opened my pillbox labeled by day and hour. I showed them the tidy pantry, the organized bills, the garden ledger Barbara had given me as a joke. The older officer smiled by 10:10 a.m. and said he was sorry for the disturbance. He promised to note the report as unfounded and warned that filing another might carry consequences. When they left, I stood in the doorway, the same doorway I had held open to the night, and realized that sometimes freedom looks like a clean table, and sometimes it looks like a closed case number. The visit from the police was only the opening volley. 2 days later, at 11:15 a.m., a woman named Patricia arrived with a clipboard and a badge from social services. She explained in a gentle voice that another report had been filed, this time claiming I was depressed and at risk of harming myself. She sat at my kitchen table while I poured tea and answered her questions clearly, steadily, one after another. When she asked if I had support, I pointed to Barbara's number on my fridge. When she asked about daily activities, I showed her my calendar marked with gardening, grocery trips, and the book club I'd joined years earlier. By 12:20 p.m., Patricia closed her folder and looked me in the eye. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "you don't need help. Your son does," before she left. She touched my hand and whispered that she had seen too many parents bullied into silence by their own children. Her validation felt like a small but powerful shield, but the escalation didn't stop there. On Friday afternoon, at 4:00 p.m., Barbara burst through my door waving the local paper. Her face was flushed with anger. "Helen, you need to read this." The headline above the letters to the editor section said, "When Alzheimer's tears families apart." My son's name, Michael Miller, was at the bottom, in black print. He had painted me as a paranoid woman unraveling with dementia, a poor mother who had cruelly thrown her son and his wife into the street. The words blurred as I read them. Not from confusion, but from rage that felt sharp enough to cut glass. It wasn't enough for them to lie to me. Now they were writing my obituary while I was still alive. Barbara steadied me with her arm and said, "Honey, this is defamation. You can fight back." At 5:10 p.m., I called Stephen Miller, an old colleague from my days as a legal secretary. He listened quietly for 20 minutes as I told him everything from the floor mattress to the false pregnancy to the police visits and now this public smear. When I finished, he cleared his throat. "Helen, you have a strong case for defamation, and even stronger for harassment. We can file both." "How much will it cost?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "Not for you. When we win, they'll cover it all." Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. For the first time, I felt I had a weapon that wasn't just silence or endurance. The paperwork moved faster than I imagined. By Tuesday morning at 9:00 a.m., a court summons was delivered to Michael and Jessica. They now faced 3 demands: a defamation lawsuit, a restraining order, and a 72-hour deadline to retract their lies in the same newspaper. At 2:15 p.m., my phone rang. It was Michael, but the arrogance was gone. His voice shook like a child's. "Mom, what is this? Are you suing us?" "Yes," I said, "but we're family. You can't drag family into court." I reminded him he had been the one to call the police, to contact social workers, to slander me in public. He begged me to drop it. I told him no. "The lawyer says we could go to jail," he whispered. "You should have thought about that before you lied." He started crying. Truly crying. The way he had when he scraped his knees at 6 years old. But my heart no longer bent so easily. "Publish a retraction," I told him, "and leave me alone." The preliminary hearing took place on Thursday at 10:00 a.m. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Michael and Jessica sat hunched beside a court-appointed attorney who looked barely prepared. Jessica dabbed her eyes theatrically. Michael stared at the floor. Stephen, calm as stone, presented evidence: the recordings of the police dismissing the complaints, testimony from neighbors about my stability, copies of the defamatory letter. When the judge turned to Michael and asked if he had written the letter without any medical diagnosis, his silence was answer enough. The ruling came swiftly, a mandatory public retraction within 48 hours. Damages of $25,000 plus legal fees, and a permanent restraining order forbidding contact or further public remarks. The gavel struck at 11:42 a.m., and for the first time in years, I felt the sound resonate as justice rather than judgment. That Friday, the retraction appeared in the paper. Michael admitted he had lied, that no doctor had ever diagnosed me, and that his words had been fueled by conflict, not truth. He apologized to the community, and to me, in ink that could never fully erase the damage, but at least drew a boundary no one could ignore. I clipped the page, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as evidence of survival. 2 weeks later, Barbara appeared at my door holding a large envelope. Inside was an offer from a retirement community in the nicest part of town. They had read about my case and wanted me to coordinate social activities, organizing events, dinners, and clubs. The position came with a furnished apartment at 71. I hadn't expected anyone to offer me a job, much less a home. But the letter said I had proven resilience, organization, and character under extraordinary circumstances. I laughed until tears rolled down my face. Barbara squeezed my hand. "So, are you going to accept?" she asked. The thought of selling the house where I had raised Michael felt heavy. But when I walked through its rooms and saw only shadows of arguments, I knew the answer. Yes, I said. Yes. Moving was like peeling off old skin. Each box I packed shed another layer of humiliation. I donated most furniture, kept only my books, photographs, and my mother's china. A young couple with a baby bought the house, their hopeful faces reminding me of who I once was before bitterness rooted itself in the walls. My new apartment was smaller, brighter, with a balcony overlooking a park. For the first time in decades, the space was wholly mine, free of whispered demands or slammed doors. And the job was a blessing disguised as work. I planned birthday parties, book clubs, dance nights. Elderly residents who had been strangers became companions. One widower told me, "Helen, you make us feel like a family." That word, family, no longer hurt. It finally meant something true. 6 months after I'd moved into my new apartment, my phone rang at 3:40 p.m. on a quiet Wednesday. It was Michael. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something in me wanted to hear his voice. He asked if we could meet. "Doesn't that violate the restraining order?" I replied. He explained he'd had it legally lifted and just wanted to talk. Against my instincts, but guided by a lingering curiosity, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop halfway between our lives. When I arrived at 5 p.m., I almost didn't recognize him. His frame had thinned, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles carved beneath his eyes. Jessica was not at his side. He stirred his coffee without drinking it, hands trembling slightly. "She left me," he said at last, voice breaking. "Spent the settlement money in a week on clothes and dinners, then walked out when she realized I couldn't support her." I sat quietly, absorbing not triumph but sorrow for what he had become. "What do you want from me?" "Michael," I asked gently. He raised his eyes, glistening with tears, and whispered, "I want my mother back. I was a terrible son. I treated you like a servant. I want to make it right, not for money, not for comfort, just to have a chance to know you again." I studied him for a long moment. He was both my child and a stranger who had wounded me more deeply than anyone else ever had. "Michael," I said slowly, "forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. I can forgive you, but I cannot return to the mother I once was. The one who let you walk over her." He nodded. ashamed. If we try again, it will be on my terms. I continued. We see each other when I decide. Where I decide. And the first time you show me disrespect, it's over. He agreed instantly, desperation heavy in his voice. Then we are not mother and son in the old sense, I said. We are two adults starting from scratch. He asked if there was hope. I smiled faintly. There is always hope, but now it is up to you to earn it. Over the following months, Michael kept his word. He rented a small apartment and worked 2 jobs to pay for it. Every week, he visited me, not demanding meals or money, but sitting across from me on my balcony, asking how I was before telling me about his struggles. It was awkward at first, like learning a language we had once spoken fluently, but forgotten. Slowly, trust grew back in small increments. Sometimes he slipped into old habits of complaint, but when he saw the look in my eyes, he corrected himself. For the first time in his life, he was learning respect not because it was demanded, but because he finally understood its worth. By the time spring arrived, our relationship had taken on a new shape. We were not the same mother and son who once lived under one roof. We were something sturdier, built from honesty instead of blind obligation. Michael even began to help me with community events, showing residents how to fix their computers, laughing in ways I hadn't heard in years. It was not perfect, but it was progress, and progress was enough. On a golden evening at 6:45 p.m., I sat on my balcony overlooking the park. The air smelled of blooming jasmine, and in my lap rested a book I had wanted to read for years, but never had time for until now. My phone lay silent beside me, for the first time in decades. I did not dread its ring. My life was mine again, quiet, dignified, full of choices I had once thought were lost forever. I had reclaimed my independence, my self-worth, and a truth that took 71 years to learn. Love, real love, never asks you to erase yourself. To everyone listening, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, let my story remind you boundaries are not cruelty. Respect is not optional, and dignity, once reclaimed, is the strongest gift you can give yourself. If you found meaning in my journey, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place?